This is an example about using the sum and difference identities. This particular example involves using cosine. It says to find the cosine of x plus y and also the cosine of x minus y, given that the cosine of x is equal to negative 8 over 17 and the cosine of y is equal to negative 3/5, and that angle x and angle y are in quadrant 3. So let's consider where angle x and angle y are. If here is our unit circle, this is quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. The thing about these angles being in quadrant 3 is that the sine and the cosine are both negative, right, in quadrant 3, so we want to keep that in mind. Okay, you could use this information, the cosine of x is equal to negative 8 over 17. You could draw a triangle, a reference angle, and figure out the sine. Another option is to use an identity. I'm going to use an identity because that's what we've been learning about. This is what I'm going to use to figure out the sine. Sine squared of x plus the cosine squared of x is equal to 1. This is the one Pythagorean identity that I memorized. The other two I just derived by dividing both sides of this equation by sine squared of x, or dividing both sides of this equation by cosine squared of x. I can come up with the other two Pythagorean identities. Okay, so I'm going to use this one to find sine squared of x. So I'll get that the sine squared of x plus cosine squared of x, which is negative 8 over 17 squared, is equal to 1. I'm going to solve this equation for the sine of x. So sine squared of x plus 64 over 17 times 17 is 289 is equal to 1. I'm going to subtract 64 over 289 from both sides. 1 minus 64 over 289. I'm going to make 1 into a fraction by putting it over 1. 1 over 1 minus 64 over 289. I need a common denominator of 289. So this becomes that the sine squared of x is equal to 289 over 289 minus 64 over 289, and that is equal to 289 minus 64 is equal to 225 over 289. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides and find out that the sine of x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 225 over 289. And so the square root of 225 is equal to 15. 289, the square root of 289 is 17. Now we're going to use the fact, this would be plus or minus, however, we know that angle x is in quadrant 3, which makes the sign negative right there. So we know that the sine of x is negative 15 over 17. I'm going to do something very similar to figure out what the sine of y is. So, right here, I'm going to start with the same identity. Sine squared of y plus the cosine squared of y is equal to 1. Sine squared of y plus negative 3 over 5 is equal to 1. Sine squared of y plus 9 over 25 is equal to 1. Sine squared of y is equal to 1 minus 9 over 25. I'm going to make 1 a fraction, 1 over 1. I'm going to common denominator of 25, so this will turn into sine squared of y is 25 over 25 minus 9 over 25. 25 minus 9 is 16 over 25. This is what the sine squared of y is equal to. Take the square root of both sides and you'll get that sine of y is plus or minus the square root of 16 over 25, which is 4/5. Again, we know that angle y is in quadrant 3, so the sign is negative. So we say that the sine of y is negative 4/5. Okay, now we know what the sine of y is and the sine of x is. We were given the cosine of x and the cosine of y. If we need to find the cosine of x plus y, we're going to use the sum identity. This cosine of a plus b is equal to the cosine of a, cosine of b minus sine a, sine b. So if I just think of the cosine of x plus y, this is the cosine of x, cosine of y minus the sine of x, sine of y. I'm simply going to plug in the values and evaluate. So the cosine of x plus y will equal to, the cosine of x is negative 8 over 17. And the cosine of y is negative 3 over 5. And then by formula, a minus sign goes in the middle. The sine of x times the sine of y. The sine of x is negative 15 over 17. And the sine of y is negative 4 over 5. When you multiply fractions, let's recall a over b times c over d. You multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. So, negative 8 times negative 3 is a positive 24. 17 times 5 is 85 minus 15 times 4 is 60 over 85. So we get a positive 24 because of a negative 8 times a negative 3. We get a positive 60 because of a negative 15 times a negative 4. And this minus sign is this minus sign. So 24 minus 60 is negative 36 over 85. And 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I do not believe that this will reduce. So this is what the cosine of x plus y equals to. Very similarly, I'll use the identity cosine of a minus b is equal to the cosine of a, cosine of b plus sine a, sine b. If I consider this to be x minus y, this becomes the cosine of x, cosine of y plus the sine of x, sine of y. I'm just going to go in and plug the values in since we've already done that work. The cosine of x times the cosine of y will be negative 8 over 17 times negative 3 over 5 plus sine of x, sine of y will be negative 15 over 17 times negative 4 over 5. Again, negative 8 times negative 3 gives me a positive 24. 17 times 5 is 85. Plus 15 times 4 is a positive 60 over 85. This time we add 24 and 60, which is going to give us 84 over 85. And this is what the cosine of x minus y equals to.